Hey everybody, so talking about backgrounds and soft effects in film today. So we're going to go through exactly what those things are, how we can define those things, and take a look at some examples and do some brainstorming, potentially about what these things might be in regards to your scenes and your locations within the sequences that you've chosen. Because ultimately, in regards to backgrounds, it's sort of like creating an atmosphere for an environment, right? So there's going to be a whole bunch of different little layers that we can stack on top of each other to sort of, paint the picture for each one of those locations. So let's get into this. All right, so let's start first with backgrounds. What these things really are sounds that define a location or scene. So consistent sounds that are always going to be at that location, that really just make us feel like we're there, right? So we want to engage our audience. We want them to feel like they're consumed by these locations and that they're realistic most of the time anyway. So they're going to be there throughout the entire location. It's not like they're going to be there for just part of the time and then stop. It's like, well, if it's outdoors and it's windy, there's always going to be wind, right? So we can acknowledge that those sounds need to be consistently there. So let's go through some scenarios here, look at some different pictures, and start thinking about all the different sounds that might make up that atmosphere. All right, so here's our first one. Think of the things that you need to hear if you were supposed to, make your audience feel like they're in this location. Okay, so you might hear some gentle breeze, right? Doesn't look like it's real windy, but there's got to be some wind, right? All right, and so if there's wind, usually there's like, with sounds like these, there's often going to be a reactionary sound, right? So if there's wind, then we're going to hear some leaves rustling, right? Okay. We're also going to hear the water, and we're going to hear the waves that are coming in on the sand. So there's 4 layers already of stuff. We might hear some animal sounds. So I'm thinking, well, we're looking at more of like a jungle beach sort of situation here, right? So there's going to be a couple of different kinds of insects, maybe. Some seagulls and birds. Even though we don't see these things, we can imply that they're there, right? It wouldn't seem unusual. Okay, now if in this case it doesn't really make too much sense, but if those clouds in the distance were any darker, we could have some distant thunderstorm sounds, something like that. All right, and it looks like there's some there's like a raft and there's like buoys and stuff out there. So even though we don't see a lot of people, we can assume that maybe there's some people on the other side of the camera. So we might be able to have some people sounds. It might be sparing because there's, we don't actually see any human beings here, but there might be some of that. Could even be some ocean noises like dolphins or whatnot, even though we don't necessarily see them. So you can see there's a whole bunch of different layers there. So let's think of the next one here. All right, so a busy Times Square. What kind of sounds are you going to hear? And are those associated with things that you actually see, or are we just assuming that they're there? Okay, so we've got the crowd, obviously, right? Going to have crowd noises. So people walking around and shuffling, but also all the chatter that's probably going to be there. Then we're going to have traffic noise. And what comes along with traffic noise? There's going to be layers of motors, of squealing tires, maybe. Let's think. There'd be cars honking. There'd be the sound of the bus, like hydraulics and things like that. There might even be, some police sirens or something like that. Maybe there's some megaphones or some announcements being made through all the craziness or the speakers and stuff in there. There's oftentimes actual audio music coming from some of these billboards and things, or street performers doing that sort of stuff. Okay, so Maybe even just the sound of the fluorescent lighting and stuff has its own sort of unique sound that could be mixed in there. So lots of different sort of layers of sounds that we need to, piece together and balance out so we can paint this picture a little bit. And then we can put the important sound effects up front and center, but we need to like have this stuff as the canvas in the background. All right, one more of these. All right, so this one's a little bit more abstract. What would you hear in this situation? So a lot of times, there's plenty of times where we're not necessarily grounded in reality, right? So this is sort of like a lobby at a weird old kind of hotel. So I might hear creaking, even though I don't see anything like that, but I mean, we could just assume it's sort of dilapidated, right? So we might hear some of the the shifting of floorboards and just the creakingness of an old building. I think it's safe to say that there would even be some like spooky wind, even though it's indoors, but there would be some sounds like that. Okay, I wouldn't be surprised to hear like sounds from this rickety old elevator, so a motor kind of sound and like old air conditioning, sort of fan noises and things like that. There might be some droning sort of machinery sounds, I imagine. All right, so again, even a simple sort of layout like this, where we're making these implications, we're making assumptions, but we can paint an interesting picture. And you also have to think that this stuff is going to be based around a mood or an emotion as well. So when you see this, are you thinking happy, or are you thinking creepy, or are you thinking sad? And that's going to help you determine what kind of things that you hear. So if you want to go with a creepy vibe, then you're going to incorporate that into your sound design. All right. So let's watch some examples. This first example that I've got for you is from a famous war movie called Apocalypse Now. You should definitely be watching these movies. It's a movie about the Vietnam War, and a couple of guys are going to, they're on a boat, and they're going to just go off through the jungle to find some food, basically, when no war stuff is really happening at the moment. But pay close attention to all the sounds that just define these locations.
I'm not here. I'm walking through the jungle gathering mangoes. I meet Raquel Welch. We make a nice mango cream pudding. Kind of spread it around on us.
Hey, Captain, I want to get some mangoes.
Just don't go out there by yourself. You don't want to go in there alone. Not unless you really know the territory.
Any poisonous snakes around here?
Fuck it. I'm gonna go get some mango.
Shit.
Yes, sir.
How come they call you that?
Call me what, sir?
Chef. Cause you like mangoes and stuff?
No, sir. I'm a real chef. I'm a saucier.
Saucier?
Yes, sir. See, I come from New Orleans. I was raised to be a saucier. Great saucier.
What's a saucier?
We specialize in sauces. Gotta be a mango tree here somewhere. And then I was supposed to go to Paris, study at the Scoffier School. Then I got orders for my physical. Hell, I joined the Navy. Heard they had better food. Cook school. That did it.
Oh, yeah, how's that?
Oh, you don't want to hear about that. They lined us up in front of 100 yards of prime rib. All of us, lined up looking at it. Magnificent meat. Really. Beautifully marbled. Magnifique. Next thing, they're throwing the meat into these big cauldrons. All of it. Boiling it. I looked inside, man, it was turning gray. I couldn't fucking believe that one. That's when I applied for radioman school, but then they gave me the engine
All right. So surprise. I love this scene. I love the intensity that it builds up. But they just do a phenomenal job with those background sounds. I mean, it's unmistakable what that is, right? They're walking through jungles in Vietnam, and it feels like that. You get, lots of different insect sounds. You get movement in both sides of the ears, panning and stuff with those things. You get all these wonderful sounds, but it also works to help build intensity. You notice that they treat the size of the shots as if they're like different locations. So when they're close up and there's leaves all around, we get more of the bug sounds, and they're closer up in our ears. And then when they're more establishing wider shots, then we lose a lot of that sort of sound. So they're treating those almost as totally different locations, and it's it's affecting the palette of these sound colors that they're painting with their atmosphere here. And we also start to get these droning sort of high-pitched sounds in the background to sort of build up your anxiety as you're anticipating something happening. And notice also that there's some other sounds that are used, like birds cawing and stuff like that, as we're transitioning from one shot to the next. So they're using those as like a tool and an emotional sort of response. And there's these lulls, right? There's these moments where the sound design, really backs off, and it makes you sort of anticipate what's going to happen next. So really well done in this particular sequence. Another example here. This is I'm going to go back. This is a much different sort of sound design. So this is from a famous David Lynch movie of the late 70s called Eraserhead. It's a very bizarre film. Bizarre sound design, but often regarded as one of the greatest sound designs ever to be made in film ever. And this is the opening sequence. And it's just worth watching, even if this movie is totally off your radar and not something you're interested in, but you definitely should watch it. But because the sound design is so different and so effective. Let's watch. All right, so definitely a different sort of sound design, right? What in the world is going on in this? And I think part of what makes this really unsettling is that we have no idea what's going on with this, right? We don't see any other people. We just get this one guy. Nothing is explained. Everything looks creepy and bizarre, right? And we get some of these, the mixture of like these industrial noises. For a brief minute there's like some very distant, almost like carnival music for a second. But I wouldn't really consider music to be part of that necessarily, but maybe if there really was a carnival nearby. Anyway, it just adds a layer of creepiness. But also the fact that we don't actually get any other sound effects coming through, and we're only hearing the background sounds, makes this a little bit more surreal than we would normally think of. And yeah, just an interesting layering of all these sort of bizarre sounds that reinforce right from the very beginning. Again, and this is the opening sequence of this film, that we're supposed to feel uncomfortable watching this. So as the sound designer, as a post-production person, you need to be able to help achieve some of these emotional aspects that the filmmaker is going for, right? Now, a lot of times you're going to be the director in this case, right? You're going to be the sound designer, but you're also making some of the decisions. But other times you're going to be listening to what someone else's vision is, and you're just going to help achieve that with the sound. Anyway, you should definitely go see Eraserhead, right, from David Lynch. Okay, a couple of things about recording, since we're not actually going to be doing any of these recordings ourselves, right? Because we don't have access to the equipment from the Kulin Center, so there's no expectation of you guys doing the recording. However, we might as well discuss it a little bit. We would be doing this had we been meeting in person. You need to record several minutes of material from wherever you're going, because, I mean, even if the scenes themselves aren't very long, you want to have more than enough material from those locations. So whatever it is that you're recording, if it's birds chirping, if it's wind or traffic noise or something like that, get a lot of content, because you know, if you only record 30 seconds of something and you wind up having to use several minutes of it, you're going to have all this recycled content, and people are going to start noticing that they are hearing the same things over and over again. So always record more than you need, and there's some things that go along with that. You're going to have to be careful of noise from yourself, handling the equipment. You're going to have to be worried about your positioning. If there's actually wind around, you want to record the sounds of the wind on something else, but not to record the sounds of the wind blowing into a microphone, right? That's kind of tricky. So you have to be mindful of those kind of things, or just unwanted sounds sneaking in there. But also, if you're going to be recording several minutes of something, you need to bring extra batteries. You need to make sure you have enough SD card space, hard drive space, all that kind of stuff. You need to have your equipment charged, have backups. The worst thing in the world is to get on location and finally be ready to do something and realize you don't have any batteries or something. You need to be able to work efficiently. So some things to be aware of when you're recording backgrounds, and some other things that I didn't list on here, making sure that you're recording these in a stereo format of high quality. Normally background sounds are going to be in stereo because they're sitting in the background, and we want like the main effects to be panned to their location on the screens, and the background sounds are just sort of be panned hard left and right, sort of sitting in the background. Also, the type of microphone that you're going to be using. So using a shotgun microphone will allow you to be extra directional with the audio that you capture. So having that ability will prevent some of these other things you're talking about, prevent noise or unwanted sounds if you use that kind of a microphone. All right, and a couple of words on sounds that come from a library. You can go too far with these things. It's always better to record your own unique sounds because, believe it or not, if you use archived library sound effects that are these background atmospheres, people will have heard them before and they'll notice. It's amazing. You'd think, well, who is going to remember minute number 3 from this jungle atmosphere audio track? But people will, and they'll call you out for it. So they should be used as a complement to your original recordings if we are able to do that. So for us, in these purposes here, we're pretty much going to be using this library content because that's all we have. But we want to have our own recordings as much as possible. So one way that we can make this library content sort of different, you could do all sorts of different things, but if you filter out some EQ, then you're going to be able to make things sound a little bit different. You could pitch shift things, you could slow things down or speed things up. Let's see, you could reverse some things like wind noise in reverse or crowd noise, something like that. That could be kind of interesting. So you have to play with things like that, but at least then you're doing something to make it a little bit more your own rather than something that somebody's heard in every rerun of The Simpsons or whatever. Okay, so moving on to the other topic that I wanted to get to with this is soft effects. Similar to backgrounds, they're just sound effects that are not associated with on-screen action. So to make the delineation between soft effects and backgrounds, both of them are likely not really associated with specific action on screen. But we can assume that background sound effects exist because of what we see on the screen. But backgrounds are consistent throughout the entire scene or location. Soft effects can come and go and can be used as emotional cues, or they can be used as other tools for, maybe to trigger something happening in a scene, right? Or a reaction from one of the characters. For example, there might be, on a city street, there might be an ambulance that drives by, but we're only getting a soft effect because that might be off screen. But it happens as as an emotional cue that a character on screen is looking concerned for some reason. And if we didn't have the ambulance siren, then we wouldn't understand why, or maybe it would seem strange that the character is distressed in any way. But if we have that, even if it's not visual, if we have that audio cue of an ambulance, then we know there's a reason to be upset about something. So soft effects, not associated with specific on-screen action, but are implied by the location that we're seeing as an audience, and can be used as a tool to create some sort of emotion. All right, so let's again brainstorm some things. What are some soft effects that we could use in a situation like this? Let's say the scene was eventually these guys start running. So the soft effect, maybe we don't see anybody in the room and we don't see this piece of equipment, but what if we had a heart rate monitor that starts to flatline? That would be a soft effect because we're not seeing the little bleeps on the monitor. We're not seeing that stuff happen, but it could be an emotional trigger for the scene here. Another thing might be like, I don't actually see an intercom speaker, but we could hear some sort of announcement like that to cause a reaction or an emotional response from the characters on the screen. So those are a couple of things that could be happening. That would be soft effects. All right. So soft effects in a riot sequence like this. Again, different than the background sounds, the sounds that you expect to hear. What are some of the other things that might be implied by this situation, but maybe, not something quite visual here? I'm thinking like, police sirens or police on a megaphone saying to cease and desist and stuff like that. Maybe a helicopter sound, right? I don't see a helicopter, but it's reasonable to think that this crowd is big enough where there might be something like that happening. Maybe there's a gunshot, some other, violence, some weapon, some sound like that. Tear gas or something. Okay. Something that might illustrate why there's some sort of reaction on screen. All right, what about this bar sequence? The background sounds that you're going to hear are like the chatter of people, some clinking of glasses and things like that. But something a little bit more specific would be like, dishes breaking. Because, maybe there's a reaction on screen. But nothing about this that we see really implies that something specific like that is happening, but we can use it as a tool for an emotional response on the screen. Okay. So let's watch an example. This is from a movie in the mid-2000s called Children of Men. Excellent movie. It's about the not-too-distant future when people, for some reason, have stopped being able to give birth and get pregnant. So finally, for the first person in like 18 years is pregnant, and everybody wants control of this person for political reasons and whatnot. And Clive Owen's character here is going to try to escape from this farm where they thought people were going to help them, but obviously they have ulterior motives. So think about background sounds, but also what soft effects are used. What other things that are more specific and less consistent than background sounds, but maybe still not something that we necessarily see, only something that we hear that is sort of implied by these locations. Let's take a look.
Stop the fucking car! Give me the fucking keys! Give me the fucking keys! Alice, get down! Get down! They're coming! Go! Keep going! God, he's gaining on us! Can I shoot? I got a clean shot! No!
Miriam, jump start the car!
Oh, we have to go! Oh my God.
Wait till it gets faster!
All right, just push, you push! We have to wait for him! There!
Go, go, go!
All right, that's a great sequence, but you got to think about, so again, soft effects, a little bit different than backgrounds. What are the things that we hear that maybe we eventually see, or that we don't see at all, but that are, not as consistent, that just imply things or create an emotional response? And the things that I'm thinking of was, definitely the dog barking. All right, so that's not there all the time. It's there occasionally. And we don't actually see the dogs at first. So, at first maybe it is a background, but it becomes sort of a soft effect, right? Because we're using it strategically because we eventually see some dogs. It'd be strange if we just, at the end of the scene, got some dogs and there was no evidence that they were there previously. So we get the dogs barking here and there. And then another one of the things that, I'd like to point out is, when this scene first begins, is it nighttime or is it daytime? What is it, right? And one of the biggest cues for us there is that we get the soft effect of the rooster, right? So it tells us that it's actually just really early in the morning. And then eventually, obviously, the sun rises a little bit, and it becomes more obvious that it's morning time. But that rooster used strategically, again, it's not consistent. It's just used here and there to imply, one, their location. They're out in the country on a farm where they would have animals like this. But two, it's also telling us what time of day it is, and reinforcing the location, the setting, time of day, all those kind of things. So what kinds of things can you do in your scene? Maybe you have a nighttime scene that's outside. And the background sounds that are going to be consistent are like wind and blades of grass and birds and insects, right? But maybe there's a moment where it's kind of like leading up towards a person feeling kind of scared. So right before you need an emotional response, you have the coyote howling at the moon right at that moment. Now, we don't see the coyote, but it's something that elicits that response from us that we can use strategically for a purpose like that. So hopefully that helps you understand the difference between backgrounds and soft effects. Make sure that you come up with a good palette of layers of sounds for all the different locations that you've got. So on the assignment page, it's going to say stuff about like 8 different background sounds for each one of those locations, and they'll be mixed in different sorts of ways. And then some soft effects thrown in here and there for good measure, just as emotional responses and as sort of strategic moments in your sound design. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, everybody.